Today on the Idiot's Guide, we are continuing our MILF series. Man, I love fireworks. What is true patriotism? Man, that's a question. Man, that's almost serious. It sounds serious. I hope it is serious. It is pretty serious, guys. And everything tastes better with bacon, including a baseball. I'm your host, Adam Richardson, aka the Prophet Hacker, and I'm joined by the man in charge, Mr. Joe Haslam. Welcome to the Idiot's Guide. All right, everyone. Well, to kick this off, I don't want to bore you guys to death with a bunch of facts, but that's all we got today. So pretty much, if you're still listening after the last minute and a half of the recording, thank you for joining us. But hey, stay tuned. There's actually a lot of really, really good stuff that we're going to talk about today. First and foremost, I've got a ton of things of quotes going all the way back to the Roman Empire. Some serious stuff. Like, what does patriotism have to do with the Roman Empire or anything going on way back then and way back even before then and all that kind of stuff? But I don't need to go back 2,000 years to get a good definition of what patriotism is. Joe, can you tell us a little bit about maybe, how we should listen to our founding father?
So in looking at some of these ideas, I decided to look into the history, and I had actually never read this before, and I'm surprised we don't read this more in school. But I recommend everyone to read George Washington's farewell address. This was in September of 1796, so over 200 years ago. But George Washington, first president of the United States, general of our armies, just the founding father of our nation, a great man to look up to. And I think anyone who is a citizen of the United States can agree with that statement, that he is someone to look up to. And in his farewell address, he talks about what true patriotism is. And there are a lot of different references to it, but I think this quote right here is the best definition. Citizens by birth or choice of a common country, that country has a right to concentrate your affections. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. With slight shades of difference, you have the same religion, manners, habits, and political principles. You have in common cause fought and triumphed together. The independence and liberty you possess are the work of joint councils and joint efforts, of common dangers, sufferings, and successes. But these considerations, however powerfully they address themselves to your sensibility, are greatly outweighed by those which apply more immediately to your interest. Here, every portion of our country finds the most commanding motives for carefully guarding and preserving the union of the whole. No matter the differences that we have, socially, politically, religiously, the most important value of a patriot is keeping the union together.
I think that if there was a microphone during that time, that's like a good mic drop moment right there. He's just skadoosh right there.
Right.
You know, I was thinking while you were going on about this, and the word American kind of made me think. I was like, well, technically, American lies in two hemispheres. So, but even in that, like when we think, we're like, oh, America, whatever, true patriotism, our mentality is always on the United States of America. But you got Canada in there. You've got Central America, South America. It's not just a little America. It's lots of America. So it's really hard to kind of go like, okay, the name American isn't but I want to maybe say this. I don't know any Canadians that don't call themselves Canadians and call themselves Americans, mainly because of, I'm going to guess, because of their close connection to the monarch, so I don't know.
Now, back when George Washington said this, again, this was 1796, there weren't a lot of other established countries, either that we knew about or that were political powers enough to come in mind when you were saying we're American. So they did adopt the term American because it's United States of America.
So in the terms of The Office, we copyright that.
Right.
It's copyrighted because we said it
However,
first.
There are a lot in South America that have a problem with us saying we are Americans because they also feel that pride of being Americans as well from South America. And so I do generally try to say I am a U.S. citizen as opposed to American. Now, obviously, in this is where a lot of it comes from was, we're American. But I do try to say I'm from the United States as opposed to I'm from America, not to devalue my patriotism of the Union, but rather to increase the value of we are the United States.
In other countries, there is no term for United States other than the United States. Like that's all they use is the United States, or they'll use U.S. They'll say that, but most of them, in everywhere that I've ever been, it is American, and that is reference to a citizen of the United States. Mm-hmm. In Arabic, it's Amariki, which is it's not me speaking a language. It's just that's a reference to, being a U.S. citizen. And so, even though I make that point, I think the bigger picture of what we're talking about here is that patriotism and what is true patriotism. And I think, a good way to kind of take away from this is to say, okay, well, in that concept, in that thinking about protecting our home and the well-being and not finding ourselves wrapped up in one perspective over another, it's seeking to serve. And we do that as a country, as a military force, as a civilian, world, you name it, the movements are initiated primarily and largely from United States. And, even though we have lots of, joint forces that are out there together for a lot of different, humanitarian efforts, it still is leading the pack, and a lot of it is attributed to our military power. I was doing a little bit of research recently, and talking about March. This was a study back in March 2021. I know that they've done a little bit of force reduction since then, because that happens every once in a while. But currently, active duty stationed overseas, is 170,000 active duty military personnel. And so that's like force management, military ops other than war. So it's not just conflict, and we have full mobilization, where we've seen some of those wars more recently. How that's a lot more substantial activation, but just kind of where we are right now. We're technically in a peacetime moment in our history, and that's where we're sitting, 170,000 strong, give it a little bit over 170,000 worldwide that aren't in the U.S.
Yeah. And I mean, this idea of the United States, being spread throughout the world, is actually not a new concept. There's a lot of, political stuff one way or another. We're not going to get political here. But there's actually another paragraph from George Washington's farewell address that talks directly to this idea of America's involvement in the world. And it is observe good faith and justice toward all nations, cultivate peace and harmony with all, religion and morality enjoin this conduct, and can it be that good policy does not equally enjoin it? It will be worthy of a free, enlightened, and at no distant period a great nation to give to mankind the magnanimous and too novel example of a people always guided by an exalted justice and benevolence. Who can doubt that in the course of time and things, the fruits of such a plan would richly repay any temporary advantages which might be lost by a steady adherence to it? Can it be that Providence has not connected the permanent felicity of a nation with its virtue? The experiment, at least, is recommended by every sentiment which ennobles human nature.
You know, I think what's an interesting point is right at the very beginning of that is this, this act of serving. You're not going in to just dominate and be that force. Although our military presence is something that's kind of served as that protector, right. And that view has been distorted in times that have really not resulted in good things. And I read an article that was talking about the difference between interstate and intrastate conflict, and it wasn't our own country. It was talking about it, our involvement in other military conflicts. And I want to say there's somewhere around. I might be wrong on this number. I saw it, but I couldn't remember where I found it. It was somewhere around 800 military established establishments around the world, globally. And that's, a lot of them are in Europe and the surrounding countries there. But I guess the point of it is a lot of I'll use Iraq for an example of that. Iraq, we have a military presence that was in Kuwait and or Saudi Arabia actually. And when Saddam Hussein decided he wanted to get froggy with Kuwait and take over their oil fields, that resulted in the military stepping in or the U.S. military stepping in and pushing everything back. And pushing them back over to the border of this. Well, then, but what was interesting about that is that we just not maybe 10 years prior to that gave Iraq all of the military equipment that we blew to smithereens during that conflict with Kuwait, because they were trying to defend themselves against Iran. So, we even against a nation that we were fighting against, we were going against our own equipment that we had equipped them with because they got emboldened. So we pushed them back. Then come 2 years later, or 10 years later, 10, 12 years later, and we have another conflict, this time inside more of a civil unrest inside of Iraq. And that civil unrest results in us unseating Saddam Hussein for lots of different reasons, lots of political reasons that they say, okay, well, this is what was it. This is the reason why. We're going in there for this reason. We're going in there. Guys, I was there. I'll just say, hey, I got a lot of thank yous. That was what it was worth for me. And, if that was all I took away from that conflict was the thank you for letting them become a non-dictatorial society, then I'm happy that I took part in that. Because Saddam Hussein wasn't a good person. I think, our nation kind of got wrapped up in trying to figure out what the hot headline was just to keep the U.S. interested in, or the U.S. citizens interested in what's going on over there. That's fine. I get it. Everyone loves controversy and they just eat it up. But what happened over there? Then we start building up a little semi-army. We disbanded the military that was there, built up a new one, and tried to democratize the whole society. So now there's this voting authority, but you have three different groups of Muslims that are there in Iraq. So you have this conflict that you basically have to have three different distinct leaders that are leading that country. And that's in a nutshell what's still currently happening now. Well, now we have the unrest again where Iran is still wanting to have something to do with it. But I don't think I think they know better, because we still have some presence in Iraq. We definitely still have a very dominant presence in that region. And to go back to my intrastate versus interstate, when we're in that presence, it deters any of those leaders from really infiltrating in that way. They don't want to mess with it because that means they're going to pick a fight with the U.S. And post Cold War. Actually, during the Cold War was this weaponization response. And that's really where this comes from. And that's what our position hasn't changed since then. There was a race with Russia during that, or the Soviet Union at the time. And so during the Cold War, it was an operational posture whereby the U.S. and Soviet forces were primed to commit themselves to full-scale retaliation within 20 minutes to beat an intercontinental flight time of a ballistic missile. I mean, that was our goal. Like anywhere where we would face a conflict against Soviet forces, we have a global position where we can respond within less than a half an hour. And that is insane because that position has not changed for our history since the 1950s.
Yeah, and it's, I keep coming back to George Washington.
Oh, yes. Oh, that reminds me of a quote of good...
Now, it's really interesting. George Washington, I don't know how he did it. I mean, he was an amazingly smart individual, foresaw a lot of the conflicts that we would come across and a lot of the issues that we would face. And his farewell address isn't a saying goodbye to the nation. That was the first, I think, 3 paragraphs saying that he's not going to run for re-election and that he's just going to retire. Mm-hmm. The full length of it was him saying, "This is my advice to the future. Having been through all of this, having seen everything, having been president for 2 terms, I am now giving my words to the future."
Yeah.
And his biggest fear at the end of his address was that it would be ignored. And I kind of see that. It is being ignored today.
Yeah.
Which is why I really want to bring a lot of this up, because he saw a lot of it. He was instrumental in establishing this nation. He knew what was going on. But one of the things that he talks about in here is one of the methods of so this is talking about using government money. So the funds being paid for by our taxes. As a very important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. One method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible, avoiding occasions of expense by cultivating peace. But remembering also that timely disbursements to prepare for danger frequently prevent much greater disbursements to repel it. And so the idea is spend on public defense and spend on preserving peace, because what that means is that you're going to spend a lot less money in the future about protecting that peace.
I think they were another thing I was talking about for just public defense. It was like from the Cold War up until after the Vietnam War, the end of like 1977, and like really official. I think there was the ceasefire was 1973, and so during that time, there was, for military spending, was something in the ballpark of like 12.9 trillion. So it's like $303 billion a year. And that's not even like talking about our military advancements to the degree that we are right now. And military advancements are important. You're talking about always continuing to be better, to be greater. And there isn't a force on earth that would even dare try. And like, you have these people who, get these short little, flexes where they're like, "Hey, you want to try?" it's literally there, basically talking about our ability. There's no other military establishment that's within a decade of attained comparable capability, and none yet is even attempting to do so. So that means like these little ones where they're like, oh my goodness, this country shot off an intercontinental ballistic missile. And you're like, oh, neat. Try, like we can make a place an island if you want it to, like that. Like that was the thing though, is like, why are we here when we have a solution? It's real fast, Well,
and I as callous as that statement was, you can tell who the veteran of this group is.
Yes. Eloquence is not my forte.
I think that is an important concept. We have the power to essentially wipe out just about any other nation on the earth, but we don't. And that comes back to, I think, one of our founding principles here. And it's from the quote that I read earlier about always guided by an exalted justice and benevolence. And that idea of we should never go in to take it over to run it. Imperialism, we've tried that in the past and it has not worked and has led to a lot of problems, but rather an idea of benevolence, protecting individuals from these dictators.
Yeah.
From individuals who are taking advantage of the citizens of their nation.
Well, I mean, anybody with that, can take it to an extreme, and with the right kind of charisma can basically influence a war. You have or exterminate an entire generation of people. I mean, that's what this has been for reasons why we would enter into a war in World War II was for that reason. And, I think this goes back, I was doing some in my research talking about the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire being what it was, how big it was, for how long it was, and all that kind of stuff. Even them, taking into account some of this. This is a quote from an author named Edward Gibbons, and basically wrote a book. It's called The Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire. This is on page 453. That's how accurate we're going to be today. But basically it says, history undertakes to record the transaction of the past for the instruction of future ages. And I think, we always say history repeats itself, and like, why? Like, if you don't learn from that, you're definitely bound to repeat what you've done over and over and over. And we see that over and over and over. Yep. It's unfortunate how little we pay attention to that actual quote and actually apply the learning aspect of it so that we can avoid it. And so much so that we can go, okay, if I want to become an egomaniac and start, killing a whole bunch of people and, authoritarian, tyranny, and this is the way I'm going to govern everybody around me, and they don't have a choice at this point. Well, history can show, and it does show repeatedly, how bad that ends every single time. And, one of the things that the Roman Empire did for their emperors. Now, granted, they had some really, really terrible ones. They also had some great emperors. So, this isn't a great thing or a good thing, but, it's not a bad thing either. This was just kind of a moment that when a new emperor was crowned, I don't know, do you crown an emperor? Do you appoint? I don't know. They're not voted. They're just, it's the successor. I don't. Anyway,
I'm not sure what the correct term is for that.
I'm a Roman prince. No, you're not. You have an emperor, So, anyway, so the next successor for this, when they become the emperor, they ride around in a chariot through all the big regions, and in the chariot they would ride, and everybody, they had colosseums that cheering crowds all through the streets, all that stuff. It was just huge celebration for this march of the chariot. And in that same chariot was a slave that would sit there and the whole time would say memento mori, which means remember, you are mortal, you will die. And it's just kind of this, hey, don't let this ego boost go to your head and you just become a big, massive, mean guy. Now I'm wondering, like, those really, really bad leaders in the Roman Empire that historically are known for their atrocities that they did. I'm curious to know, did that slave make it through the entire chariot ride? I don't know. Like that would be my question. Would I want to be the slave that rides in that chariot? Because this guy, this successor is not going to like what I have to, if I have to say that to him. I don't know. It's just one of those things that's curious to me, is like, is there a means of that elsewhere? Our country, we swear in, we have an inauguration, and in that, they put their hand on the Bible, and they hold their hand up, and it's just all of these things for us to place honor and respect over that position. And then, there's divisive, mention out there. There's things that don't agree, one person doesn't agree with this other person, and that permeates in all over the place from one individual who's leading the pack. And that's not the United States per se. That's all over the world where that happens. But I don't know. It's just one of those things where I think memento mori is something that probably should resonate far greater than a chariot in the Roman Empire.
Yeah. And again, going back to George Washington.
Oh, this reminds me of a quote from my favorite author.
Honestly, I said it before. There are so many lines in this. I recommend everyone to read this. He talks about a lot of different things. One of them being, the dangers of political parties and how, like what you were talking about, the influence of one over another. I don't necessarily want to bring that up here because we don't want to talk politics. We're talking about patriotism and what a true patriot is. Mm-hmm. But another thing that he talks a lot about involvement with other nations. And in times of extreme need, we go out and assist.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we should focus on ourselves. And the reason for that is this, and that goes for the nation as well as individuals that can lead a person to take the lead.
Yeah.
A line from Captain America, the Marvel movie.
He quoted George Washington?
He did not quote George Washington. But there's a great line in there from the scientist who created the serum. People forget that the first nation that Hitler occupied was Germany. Not all Germans were Nazis. Not all Germans wanted Hitler to be in charge, but he took over and led to a whole lot. And even the U.S. tried to avoid getting involved until the time was necessary when we had to get involved. Mm-hmm. But this quote from George Washington's address. So likewise, a passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. So again, this can be nations, individuals, anything. Sympathy for the favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing into one the enmities of the other, betrays the former into a participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter, without adequate inducement or justification. It leads also to concessions to the favorite nation of privileges denied to others, which is apt doubly to injure the nation making the concessions by unnecessarily parting with what ought to have been retained, and by exciting jealousy, ill will, and a disposition to retaliate in the parties from whom equal privileges are withheld. And it gives to ambitious, corrupted, or deluded citizens who devote themselves to the favorite nation facility to betray or sacrifice the interests of their own country without odium, sometimes even with popularity, gliding with the appearances of a virtuous sense of obligation, a commendable deference for public opinion, or a laudable zeal for the public good, the base or foolish compliances of ambition, corruption, or infatuation.
I mean, if that wasn't a spot on, critique of or criticism, I'm just going to straight out say it's not a critique, it's a criticism of our modern society. And I there's a quote that I was looking at here. It's in today's society, naivety is vulnerability. It's essential to arm oneself with critical thinking skills, lest one be misled. And there's a term that the Oxford Dictionary adopted in their dictionary in 2016. It was the word of the year, basically, and it was called post-truth. And really, that's exactly what that is. Is this by someone's over charismatic zeal about whatever subject matter you pin at the end of that, people will go and light a building on fire. It doesn't matter. They're going to do everything with so much passion behind it, not knowing that they're absolutely misled, and that person is just feeding you lies. And that's, they've determined from the study that the reason why post-truth exists is because truth in and of itself is questioned above and beyond anything that sounds more charismatic now, more provocative. And we don't stand back and logically go like, okay, hold on a second here. Like, all right, big guy, I get it. I want to hear you, but I got to put some thought into this before you're like, no, where's the pitchfork? Where's the torches? We're going to hunt them down. And you're like, for what? What reason? Like, it's all, like the very last line of that, what was it? It was talking about just basically everything's an underlying agenda that is, you don't know those motivations or those motives that person is truly going after. You're just getting the colorful, the colorful painting that they've made, the colorful narrative that they incite the anger with. And then they're like, yes, go do that for me, And you're like, oh, that's so scary.
Well,
but it's real.
And anyone who questions the reality of a nation following another nation just because of an alliance or exactly what Washington talks about here, World War I.
Mm-hmm.
That is what happened with World War I. One nation declared war on another nation because of an assassination. And then that led, because of the treaties that were in place, another country declaring war on another country, even though no enmity existed, no conflict between those countries at all existed. But because of that alliance, they started creating these different, they had to fight against someone that they had no reason to fight against, but because they had an alliance in place, they had to. And the United States didn't have strong ties to anyone saying that they were going to go and do that.
Yeah.
But in 1917 is when the U.S. decided they needed to get involved because it was now affecting the overall good of not just the United States, but the world in general. And it was now time for us to step in and change the course of the war, which is what we have always done in every war that we get involved in. And the reason for that is because we have always been an isolationist country. I know that's weird to think. But the reason we are as successful as we are today with military, with all the advancements that we have, is because we have always been isolationist.
Isn't that always like, what is it, Switzerland?
Switzerland, yes. And Switzerland actually has a great army.
Well, it's always the motto. You're like, it is Switzerland that they talk about. Whether they go, they're like, yeah, hey, like I'm going to play neutral here. I'm Switzerland.
Yep. Yeah. And they've done a really good job of
or is that Sweden?
Always.
Man, I always mix those two up. They're two different places.
Yeah, I know. I think it's Switzerland. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We might be wrong, guys. Sorry.
This is the Idiots Guide. But no, the idea that they have a strong army, that even though they have stayed neutral. Now, the big difference between them and us is we have a lot more landmass to be able to produce a whole lot more. Mm-hmm. And so our production power makes us a much stronger world force than Switzerland, who is also the neutral party. And so that has allowed us that when we decide to no longer remain neutral and step in as the, for lack of a better word, referee for the rest of the world, to say, okay, guys, you're done.
Yeah.
We're now getting affected. You're causing problems throughout the world. We're done. And then that's it. But that's the thing. Our isolationist is our military isolationism, and yet benevolence to other nations.
Yes.
And there's a balance there. And I think that's the important thing that we've lost in a lot of our education today, is the importance of balance.
I think what's interesting is that, you know, our topic today, as we're talking about this, I was listening to a news broadcast earlier this morning talking about our president currently, and he's overseas, visiting, basically having to. There's a NATO summit coming up this in a couple days from now, and during that time, there's something brought to the table about Ukraine and bringing Ukraine on board as a NATO country, and you know, like, I don't know your own opinion or what you're thinking about this. It was just more, and I'm not going to share mine. I think it was just more about the fact that I was fascinated by what our president said about this. And it was that, you know, they like the idea of Ukraine becoming part of NATO, but not while they're in conflict directly with Russia. And the reason why is because if Russia currently goes and attacks Poland, okay, that's a NATO country, we will absolutely be there within 20 minutes. Okay?
Yeah.
And so that's the threat that happens, is it puts us directly in line with our policy, on our foreign policy, of how we respond to military conflict. So if we adopt Ukraine in, and they're currently in a conflict with Russia, that makes us, you know, we're responsible at that point to do what we've always done and come to that and intervene. Now, if Ukraine ever leads to that point, if it ever gets to that point where we have to step in like Big Brother does, you know, our footprint is greater, and even against Russia, it's still a bad problem for them to face. But, you know, to Biden's point is that he wanted to make sure that, look, I'll be happy to visit this when Ukraine isn't in a conflict with Russia, because then, you know, I'll feel a lot better about that. And also it will strengthen Ukraine to the sense that Russia won't want to step in there again, because then you're getting the full force of NATO power behind that, and specifically the U.S. government. And so I only say that because it's one of those ideas that, you know, this is not a new thing. This is not a new situation. We've done this World War I, World War II, Korean War. If you list off, I mean, you've got a list across the table from me here of all of these different conflicts that occurred. If you go back and look at the history of what we did, why we did those things, you know, I would say this: U.S. history is really ugly, guys. So, you know, if you want to be depressed about what we did as, you know, the founding fathers, go ahead and read that. But if you talk about the conflicts that we have been involved in worldwide and why we got involved, all of them are in the aid of a country in need. It isn't for, you know, and there is a lot of political stuff in there. There's a lot of other words. There's a lot of hot button words to use that are going to be like, yeah, well, there was this article, and I like to remember the truth that this came out on the news and all that kind of stuff. Every single one of those conflicts was to protect the well-being of humanity.
Right.
And that's where we, I think, as a nation, are superior in that goal. I think, remove the political agenda, and that's what patriotism is about, is this sovereignty of our country, of our nation being the strongest thing that people can lean against and say, yes, we have this. And time, that doesn't mean that we're perfect. That doesn't mean we don't make massive mistakes. Mm-hmm. We do. They're everywhere, all the time, every single day. But we will still run to everyone's trouble. And that to me is, respectable.
Yeah. And I think that's, like you said, that is what true patriotism is. Keeping the Union together. We as a nation have a responsibility to not only keep ourselves together as a union, which means we need to find harmony and balance with each other. Mm-hmm. We see a lot of conflict today in our own nation. Being a true patriot, in George Washington's words, is keeping the Union preserved.
Yes.
And going beyond that, it is keeping the union of the world preserved. Now, we stay out of conflicts where we can. Stay out of the wars, stay out of those things when we can. Now, even in World War II, we were offering assistance to the nations involved. We were providing loans. We were providing ammunition. We were providing a lot of those same things. The same things we're providing to Ukraine in the current conflicts. Mm-hmm. It's been the policy of the United States to help those in need. But we don't enter into a war until it's the point when it's Big Brother's turn to step in, because we have a lot of power. We have a lot of power, and it is the just use of that power without abuse that is so important as a nation, that we find that correct balance.
Yeah, I like that it's the just use of that power. I mean, so many times we are going up against something that is abusing the power. And for a country, I think about all of the safeguards. I mean, all the safeguards to get to a point where we have to make a decision to retaliate or to respond to a threat. And, in most of those instances, we will meet the level of threat. We won't exceed that level unless we find it necessary to do so. But even then, the discernment that comes up to that point to determine whether or not we need to exceed that level of force is mitigated until you're like, there's nothing it usually gets dismantled before it actually gets traction. Yeah. Now, that doesn't say always, because there are times where we've seen level of force exceeding that. Mm-hmm. But I respect the fact that is something that, within, our power and what we have is a respect and a responsibility to use it wisely and not abuse it, or take it and say, man, I want to show everybody in the world how big of a man I am, and just skadoosh and everything. And that's not who we are. That's never been who we are. And that's destructive. And we absolutely fight against that.
Yeah. And I think for anyone who wants to understand what a true patriot is, I don't think anyone would contest in my statement that George Washington was the epitome of a true patriot. He is the perfect example of a patriot. He even states in his address that his patriotism to the nation is what kept him serving that second term as president. And he struggled with the idea of not doing a third term because of patriotism. And that he felt that his patriotism might be betrayed if he did not serve a third term as president. But he felt that his patriotism could still be continued even after leaving the presidency. And that is what his entire farewell address is about, is how we as citizens of the United States can continue to be patriots, how we can properly show our patriotism to our nation and to ourselves and to our world. Mm-hmm. That's what that address is. And if we can live by the statements and the exhortations that he makes in his address, I think each of us can fulfill our roles as true patriots.
Do you think that he eventually, like maybe in the hours, during his free time after he's done with work for the day, he'd practice losing that British accent of his? He'd say, "Y'all, y'all, y'all."
Yeah.
Sorry,
I can't even go.
I don't know, like he was up in Pennsylvania, like that. They didn't say y'all in Pennsylvania. They still don't. My bad.
I don't think he spoke with what we would hear as a modern day British accent, because I think they were still speaking some form of Middle English at that time.
It's proper English, proper.
No, not proper English. It would be like a, almost close to what we would understand today in that Middle English period. So it was words that were close, so we could maybe understand it.
Yeah,
but not really.
I mean, if you is this letter that you found, the farewell address, is it word for word, or is it
no? Yeah, this is word
translated
for word
into modern?
This is word for word. I
Okay.
actually sent, so on the podcast we'll have a link to the actual text that is readable.
Okay.
That is just, it's word for word what it was. But there's also an image. So the Library of Congress has the actual images of his writings, so you can see it. Punctuation. Back then they had, whenever you had a double S, you had the long big S first, and then the little s after it.
So
so that's where, I mean, we read it in modern English, modern American.
right.
But back then, even though the spelling was the same, the pronunciation would have been fairly different from what we would read it today.
Yeah.
In pronunciation.
I get it. It's like aluminum and aluminium. They're the same.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so on to bigger and better things. Are we good? Do you still have more horse to beat?
Oh, I mean, I've got. I really prepared for this one because I
Joe has 18 papers in front of him and planned to be here for a minute.
Well, I found a lot of information because this was really important to me. You know, patriotism is something that is vital to all of us, and I think that word has been kind of used incorrectly. And finding out what a true patriot is really important. And balance in my life is very important. Mm-hmm. And so patriotism, per George Washington, is all about balance.
I really like the encouragement. Go read the farewell address. I mean, it's not a difficult read. You might have to go back over some paragraphs because he's so well spoken through the whole thing, but it's all chewable. It's all really good and important, and it's just a healthy reminder of why we should be good people and not just not look with disdain towards another person that thinks differently than you. You know?
We don't run from conflict, but we don't request it either.
Yeah.
We will defend those that need defending, but we won't look for a fight.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big thing about what George Washington was saying is just be there. That's what a patriot is looking out for everyone else. Looking out for everyone else in our nation, finding harmony. He actually says the word harmony a lot through this. And finding that way of being able to work together, both as individuals, as a nation, and as a world.
Well, as much as patriotism does bring together people, so does bacon.
For most people, I would agree. Unfortunately, I am quite allergic to bacon.
Oh, man. Well, don't sneeze while I'm telling you the story. I know that's not the kind of allergy you probably deal with, but, the situation is everything does taste better with bacon. And for those unfortunate souls that can't have bacon, it is unfortunate, honestly. My wife, she can't have bacon anymore. She gets near bacon and it's like, oh, goodness. So, it's just not a fun scenario. But the Macon Bacon, which is a baseball team in Macon, Georgia, they are really raising some, they're making bacon, and it's funny because they had tryouts for the mascot for them, and they actually had Kevin Bacon wear a Macon Bacon hat. And he lost to another guy named Kevin that I don't know Kevin's last name, but he's the mascot for the Macon Bacon. So technically he could maybe go by Kevin Bacon. I don't know. But
Kevin the Bacon.
So the whole reason why I'm bringing this up is there's this group of doctors, and it's quite a few. They're making a fuss about it, so much so they have a billboard against it. But they are promoting plant-based eating and animal rights. And they're making a fuss over Macon Bacon baseball team. They sent this letter, and they're just angry and really, really, one of the things that they said is Macon Bacon's glorification of bacon sends the wrong message to fans. And they talk about, cardiovascular things, blah, 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 death, whatever, like, you're right. I guarantee you're right. There are a lot of connections to it. But I also know people who stay on keto, eat bacon the rest of their life, and they're perfectly fine, so you tell me that. I don't get that math, but, whatever. The big deal is that somebody's making a fuss over bacon. And they even made a suggestion of making fakin' bacon. And I was like, well, that's dumb because you spelled fakin' wrong and they spelled it FACOM. So it's like making fackin' bacon, which doesn't sound like fakin'. It sounds like another word, So, hey, guys, what are you doing? I'm making fackin' bacon.
Especially if you're in the South.
That's what I'm doing. So fans voted for this. In 2018, they formed this new league in Macon, Georgia. And this was the number one winner, clear winner, like landslide votes for bacon, being the Macon Bacon baseball team. And the whole park, basically, it's themed this way. They have bacon wrapped bacon. They have steak cut bacon, bacon loaded cheese fries. They even have bacon chips. But they also have some plant-based options for, those non-bacon lovers that want to be part of the bacon crowd but can't, So I don't know. Like, for me, I don't know if they're cooked in the same vat, but either way, that still sounds like the worst idea ever. But I want to try the bacon wrapped bacon because that sounds really, really good. But beyond that, like, I guess, I don't think that there's going to be anything that's going to happen to the Macon Bacon other than the fact that they're going to keep making bacon. So, yeah.
Now, there are a lot of people who think that you can't have both sides to this. Now, I am allergic to bacon, so I can't eat bacon. But I do love bacon. I get sick every now and then because I can't resist bacon.
I make it in my house and my wife's like, I hate you right now. Like, sorry, bacon smells great.
One of my daughters, her favorite thing right now is BLTs.
Oh,
so yeah, it's really hard. But at the same time, I want right now, I think I've talked about this. I want to get a pet in my house because my whole family has pets and I don't. And so I want to get a pot-bellied pig.
Yeah.
And I would have no problem eating bacon in front of my pig.
Would you be allergic to the pig though?
That's what I'm not sure because I know I'm allergic. So my allergy is because I'm allergic to cats, and there is a weird allergy. I think it's about 15% of people who are allergic to cats have this cat pork allergy.
Interesting.
So it's because of the protein that I'm allergic to in the
So you
cat
don't eat
saliva.
cats either?
No, I don't eat cats either.
Okay, all right. I was just curious. I told somebody the other day, I was like, the only thing cats are good for is stew. That's it. I don't like cats either. I'm allergic to cats too, so. Yeah.
I like cats. Cats are my favorite.
Haha, did you see what I just said? I'm allergic to cat stew. Yeah, ha.
Hey, yeah, there you go.
No, sorry guys. That was terrible.
So the protein I'm allergic to, there's a similarity between cat and pig protein. And so because of that, that causes me to be allergic to pork. So any kind of pork, because mostly pork is smoked. If it's not completely cooked, like it would have to be cooked to beyond well done for me to make sure that I could actually eat it. So I could eat pork if it's...
As long as it's black and charred.
Exactly. Which
like more charcoal than pork.
It's not worth eating at that point. And that's just to make sure all the proteins are cooked out of it. But so I don't know if I would be allergic to a pot-bellied pig or not, but I want to get a pig as a pet. And a lot of people would think that's weird to eat bacon and have a pig as a pet. But I don't see that as a problem. You know, meat is fine to eat.
Right.
You should practice good animal husbandry when producing that meat. I definitely believe in that, you know, treating animals correctly during slaughter and all that process is very important. And you know, pigs are smart. There's no problem with having them as a pet. They're clean. They're great. They also make very good food and generally inexpensive food. That's why pork sausages. That's why a lot of this cheap food is made out of pork because they're easy to maintain. And so if we were to get rid of pork as a meat, it would completely obliterate a lot of those proteins that people are getting, especially inexpensive proteins, in order to survive. A vegetarian diet and a vegan diet is very expensive. I know I'm kind of getting into some other issues here, but you know, I have to live a vegetarian diet because of health reasons, and it is a lot more expensive than a meat-based diet. And so when we're talking about making bacon in Macon, Georgia, it is, you know, go for it.
It's patriotism. That's what.
Go for it. Find balance in life.
It's like the third definition in the line of
there
definitions for patriotism.
There you
It's
go.
bacon. So I don't know. Like, I'm probably wrong. I'm pretty certain about that.
I think probably at least half of the citizens of the U.S. would agree with you that bacon is patriotism.
So here's the maybe potential question to start a quarrel over. And that is, if you are having bacon, are you a crispy, like you can hold it up like it's a stick, or soggy? Or another word I would use is flaccid. You can guess which one I love.
I am completely in the crispy bacon category when I eat it.
Well, I mean, that makes more sense, especially if you, you know, the more cooked it is, the better odds are it's not going to destroy you. So,
right.
You know, I like because it's more cooked. It's near the point of almost destruction. You know, you get it to that point where all the flavors are just right there, and then stop cooking it because otherwise it will burn to a piece of charcoal instantly. Like, you're talking seconds difference there, but that bacon is perfect at that point. All
right, I'm saying somewhere in between those two. Then I don't go that far, which is probably why I get more sick than not when I do eat bacon. But
my son's like warm pieces of flappy bacon. I was like, it's so gross. It's so gross. I can't do it.
Fully rendered fat. That's all I'm gonna say. But yeah.
All right, everyone. Bacon. All right, we got to get away from this. We're about to go too long. So thank you guys for listening to the Idiot's Guide, and you know, hey, tune in next time where I think we're going to talk about some healthcare benefits and that kind of stuff. Not really us talking about the benefits, but this giant healthcare gap that happens with our military service members and the services that are out there for them. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, thanks for listening. And one last thing.
Always check your shoes.
Check your boots.
There you go.